And if you listen to the rest of that song, you'll hear a few references to him being chased by the government or hiding from the government. So there is a bit of a story of Reich in a popular song. Orgone, by the way, was the name of the sort of farm or ranch which he set up and went to live there, where he did his experiments. And I think it is worth remembering that perhaps just saying it could even make it happen. Now we'll move on to something which is perhaps a possible offshoot of Reich's work. And this is quite well known of. It is the Haarp technology. It's a large-scale project, and though most attention seems to be focused on the one in Alaska, which is very well known about and fully disclosed, it appears there may be more than one of these units around the world, perhaps as many as 10 different installations at a guess. Now, this is the picture of the one in Alaska, and it's called the High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program, not Oral Research Program. And it's an investigation project to understand, simulate and control ionospheric processes that might alter the performance of communication and surveillance systems. That is its disclosed purpose. It started in 1993, and the project was proposed to last for a period of 20 years. The project is jointly funded by the United States Air Force, the Navy, and the University of Alaska, so it is within the confines of the Department of Defense. It is said that the project is similar to numerous existing ionospheric heaters around the world and has a large suite of diagnostic instruments that facilitate its use to increase scientific understanding of ionospheric dynamics. It is a popular target of conspiracy theories. Yeah, there's a phrase. And though many have expressed fears of the Haarp being used as a nefarious weapon, the scientists involved in aeronomy, space science, or plasma physics reject these fears as unfounded. So the message that you can take from that is that be afraid of potential terrorist attacks, which might happen at any time, with these dark, suspicious characters, but don't be afraid of us, in other words, the Department of Defense, pumping 1 billion watts of energy into the upper atmosphere just to see what will happen. Because that's what they're doing. The disclosed amount is much smaller, but the potential that they have in terms of energy generation is 1 billion watts of energy can be pumped into the Haarp array and aimed into the atmosphere.
But there are other weather-related technologies that have a darker side. Bernard Eastland is a plasma physicist, former fusion researcher for the US Atomic Energy Commission, and inventor, who has 3 weather control patents. Eastland's speciality is revolutionary mechanisms of energy transfer. That was exactly the reason that the Atlantic Richfield Oil Company approached him with a unique problem to solve.
I was originally hired by ARCO in about 1984 to find a use of their natural gas on the North Slope of Alaska. They have 23 trillion cubic feet of natural gas.
To put this in perspective, that's enough gas to power the entire American electrical grid for 1 year. But its location was so remote, there was no economically feasible way to transport it.
Dr. Eastland had been contracted with them to find a way to exploit the natural gas on the North Slope. In other words, to convert natural gas to money, but first to turn it to electricity and then radio frequency energy.
I came up with the idea of using the energy in the gas to make electricity, and to use the electricity to power a large phased array antenna that could modify the ionosphere in different ways.
Eastland's massive antenna array was called Haarp, the High Frequency Active Auroral Research Project.
The claims being made about the technology were such that it was almost unbelievable.
Although the Haarp antenna array looks unremarkable, its capabilities are not. Haarp is one of the few man-made devices capable of heating the Earth's ionosphere. The ionosphere is an enveloping layer of charged particles located 145 kilometers above the surface of the Earth. The charged particles in the ionosphere perform an important function for the planet. They deflect and absorb the solar wind, the toxic onslaught of deadly particles thrown at us by the sun. Without the ionosphere, life as we know it on Earth would perish. Eastland's plan was to pump energy derived from natural gas directly into the ionosphere. The stated goal was communications research. Arco immediately understood the genius in Eastland's idea, and thanks to his patent, they were contracted by the US military to build this incredible device.
It's a very good research facility. It's minuscule compared to the size of antenna I suggested in my patents. However, it's the first piece of what could become something bigger.
But even in its current incarnation, it's the largest ionospheric heater in the world, capable of heating a 1,000 square kilometer area of the ionosphere to over 50,000 degrees.
It's also a phased array, which means it's steerable and it can point where it wants to point. You can make those waves go where you want.
What they have found is that by sending radio frequency energy up and focusing it as they do with these kinds of instruments, it causes a heating effect. And that heating literally lifts the ionosphere within a 30-mile diameter area, therein changing localized pressure systems or perhaps the route of jet streams. The idea of moving a jet stream is a phenomenal event in terms of man being able to do this. The problem is we cannot model the system adequately.
Long-term consequences of ionospheric heating are unknown.
Changing weather in one place can have a devastating downstream effect.
And Haarp has already been accused of modifying the weather. An article in Scientific American pointed out that a strange shift in the jet stream directly over Gakona, Alaska, pushed colder air southward, causing a rare tornado outbreak in Florida. As a weapon of war, Haarp's possible uses are daunting.
Think about a 100,000 person army and your opposition, and say you could hit them with flooding rains and horrible conditions in terms of weather for several weeks, maybe months. You can degrade their ability to perform in the battlefield.
Haarp has other implications as a multi-purpose weapon. Using ionospheric manipulation, it could disrupt enemy radio and cellular communication. It could even be used to sense, differentiate, and directly destroy enemy missiles.
That's where war is headed in the 21st century. That's where these systems are headed in the 21st century.
Haarp's potential role as a secret weapon of war has long been known in military circles. Numerous countries have lodged complaints against its use, pointing to it as an obvious violation of the treaty outlawing environmental modification for weapons applications.
The last 3 secretaries of defense have all called for the elimination, the dropping of this environmental treaty. This treaty was well thought out in the early 70s, ratified by our Congress in 78. That treaty needs to stay in effect.
Through all of the controversy, Haarp scientists have maintained that the array is intended only for pure research, and that it has nowhere near the power necessary to truly change the weather. However, as the results would be classified anyway, the jury is still out.
So that was a clip explaining a bit more about Haarp. Now, just to give you a bit more information, the program is described as a scientific endeavour aimed at studying the properties and behaviour of the ionosphere, with particular emphasis on being able to understand and use it to enhance communications and surveillance systems, which I've already said. The site that the Haarp facility is built on is owned by the US Department of Defense, and a 2.5 megawatt diesel generator will be used to power HF transmitters, in other words high frequency. The disclosed usage is 2.5 megawatts, which is still a lot, but it's actually a lot higher. No official link to chemtrails is stated. This is obvious. Chemtrails do not officially exist. But if you listen to what Clifford Carnicom has to say about the matter, he has looked at Eastland's patent for the Haarp technology and its relationship to chemtrails, and believes that there is a strong link which is likely between these two things. So what is Haarp really for? Again, you can go onto the website and read the information which they tell you it's for, which is harp.alaska.edu is one website. There is another one as well. But let's listen to what Dr. Nick Begich has to say.
In your opinion, Nick, what do you think Haarp is being used for?
Well, I think the thing that the military says, obviously, I believe what they say they are using it for. The two other areas which they don't get into so intensely are more areas of greater concern. What they talk about is surveillance applications for over-the-horizon radar. They're talking about using it potentially for studies to determine ionospheric characteristics and being able to influence the ionosphere, manipulate it in different ways. All of that is confirmed in the military literature. The two areas that get very controversial, one showed up in a technical memorandum that wasn't supposed to be publicly released, but it was non-classified, actually talked about the use of this technology for weather modification or weather control, and that became a pretty big issue for the European Parliament and a big issue later for the Russian Duma, both which passed resolutions opposing Haarp specifically for this particular risk factor. The other part that comes up is the use of extremely low-frequency signals for what's called earth-penetrating tomography, and this is something that MSNBC actually reported on right after 9/11, back in late November of 2001, using Haarp for this particular purpose, for looking at underground facilities in Afghanistan at the time. What people need to recognize is that the same signal range, which is approximately 1 to 40 hertz, or pulses or vibrations per second in just plain language, but these pulse rates, if they transit certain what are called window frequencies, you can trigger biological effects within the human brain that are quite dramatic, that can end up resulting in an alteration of emotional state or a number of other effects.
So that was Nick Begich discussing some of the possible uses of Haarp. It's worth pointing out, however, that Dr. Begich seems to not understand that 9/11 was an inside job, and here in this audio clip he says he thinks that the invasion of Afghanistan was absolutely justified.
We're in a conflict in Iraq, as an example, and we're there to win the hearts and minds and spread democracy. But that's not what the people apparently want. They want a theocracy, and if that's what they want in their own right to self-determination, maybe we need to recognize individual sovereignty as long as they keep it within the boundaries of their country and learn to leave people alone. We're the only country in the world with 800 bases and stations around the world to monitor and interfere with everyone else's politics. Maybe it's time to pull back a little bit towards our own borders, allow some governments to function. If they violate another state, if they violate the United States, I say stomp them into the Stone Age, as we did in Afghanistan. When we said give those guys up and they didn't do it, I think we were fully justified.
We'll now look at something which is much easier to see and talk about than things in faraway places, because you'll see these right over your head. Start off by looking at the difference between contrails and chemtrails, basically. And I'm going to read this out. Kerosene is classed as a hydrocarbon. It mainly contains alkanes, which are made up of carbon, approximately 85%, and hydrogen, approximately 12%, and oxygen, of course. There are some other compounds in kerosene which contain nitrogen and sulfur, approximately 1% or 2% each, respectively. When kerosene burns, therefore, it can only form compounds that contain elements that were originally in the kerosene, or in the air it burns in. Not surprisingly, then, the main compounds that form when kerosene burns are carbon dioxide, which is known as the infamous greenhouse gas, which we all breathe out, but that really is just another distraction that global warming is not caused by CO2. There is no real solid evidence of that, despite what's put out in the press, and that could be the subject of a separate presentation. Sulfur dioxide in small quantities, which is a toxic greenhouse gas, and it mixes with water to form acid rain, sulfurous and sulfuric acid. That's what acid rain is. And carbon monoxide is a toxic flammable gas responsible for some deaths which happen when gas heating equipment is faulty, and it's due to incomplete burning of fuel. And the other thing, of course, you get is water vapour, just like you see coming out of a car exhaust on a cold morning. When we look at each of those compounds in turn, we find that they are all colourless. Okay? So when kerosene burns, it would seem that only the visible thing we should see in the sky is the condensation, which, like our breath on a cold day, should disappear in a few tens of seconds. Indeed, when a jet takes off, we can see that only colourless compounds come out of the back. All that we see is hot air. And here is a video comparison showing the difference between contrails and chemtrails. The first section shows the ordinary contrails, which disappear in a few seconds. Now this video, on the other hand, shows chemtrails, and you can clearly see both an X pattern which moves without changing. Once the X is formed, it doesn't reform, it just moves through the sky and gradually fades away. And you will also see an ordinary contrail which disappears as the plane travels across the sky. Some people may dispute that chemtrails play a role in weather modification, but I think even when you look at them at the basic physical level on their own, in terms of the quantity of them that can appear on some days and obscure the sunlight, and indeed you then quite often get an accompanying drop in the temperature, it's quite clear that they are having an effect on the weather, even if it's only sort of quite localized and only for a short period of time. So they definitely do affect the weather, and therefore they are used for weather modification. It would seem, however, that things are happening on a bigger scale than just that as well, but it's very difficult to piece that together. But here's just a few pictures for you to look at of the chemtrails. This is a true colour picture from NASA looking back at the edge of a storm that is just clearing the West Great Lakes states. This is a very dry atmospheric environment in that the passing storm has cleared the area of available moisture for cloud formation, plus the inherent stabilization post-storm leads to a very clear skies. So we have many thick contrails that are lasting in an environment that shouldn't support their visible existence, and that's been written by Scott Stevens from his weatherwars.info site, and he's basically saying that there is no way that those trails should stay there. They're staying for minutes. I mean, you can see the length of these trails, there's no way they should be staying there. And you can even see that they cast shadows on the ground. So this is just crazy stuff. And again, we have another picture which was on Jeff Challender's site, Project Prove, and he points out here the grid pattern, and this picture was taken at a minimum altitude of 150 miles. That's about 250 kilometers, and from an angle we are looking at an atmospheric phenomenon which is at least 300 miles or 500 kilometers from the lens. Ordinary normal contrails could not and would not be visible from such a distance. In any case, contrails would never last long enough to create this blanket of material over such a wide area. And from whence does all the mass come from? We're looking at millions of tons of material to make a layer like this in the atmosphere. We can only guess how many square miles or kilometres of continental territory are shown in this photograph, but the area seen is huge. And all of this is caused by mere jet engine exhaust? I don't think so, and I would agree with Jeff Challenger on that. There is no way that you can get that sort of effect from jet engine exhaust alone. There is something else going on. And again, this picture is another NASA picture showing a weird selection of trails all over those few states shown there. And again, another one from Europe at a minimum altitude of 150 miles, and it's probably much higher since we can see entire countries here. We can make out the lower part of the Danish peninsula at the top of the picture. Note the spray activity is concentrated mostly over Germany. Once again, simple jet engine exhaust cannot account for this much mass. You'll find in a separate video, either on my Google video account or my YouTube account, which is ADJ UK, I made a video of a set of spraying which took place on the 4th of February 2007 near where I live, which is near Derby in the UK. And we've also now got a similar satellite picture to the one shown here, that we've seen these trails both from space and on the same day at around the same time when I took pictures of them from the ground. Just a few more snapshots here really. This is a NOAA picture. Battle Creek, Michigan, 2004. The day begins without a cloud in the sky until the planes appear, and so often they fly in pairs. Well, I often see them come after one after another. They don't sort of fly in parallel where I am, but this is fairly unusual to see this much of a set of parallel lines. And this wasn't an air show, folks. Here's one from Redding, California. We've got a mixture of different types of trails which are spread out there. We've got a fairly clear one there, one which is older, which is spread out more, and here too. And then we've got this effect here. And this is one I took in the Lake District in the UK, as you can see on that date. It's quite a busy day, that, chemtrail wise. And then I did like a panorama shot. Took a couple of pictures together, and this was 24th of Jan 2006. A friend I know in Yorkshire, which is in northern England, he took this picture. We can see some particular design of trails there, and what that's meant to achieve I don't know, but it's not an accident. And again, the same friend took this picture, and here we see the line effect again. Paris. And then the one which really made me wake up when I took this, and this was on the 10th of June, and there is no way that this is an ordinary set of air traffic. No way. It's not possible to have this being caused by ordinary air traffic. I mean, to me, you'd think that was an air show or something, but this was 9:45 p.m. in the evening, right outside my window, which is about 6 miles outside Derby. And I've marked up on this picture. This picture is slightly zoomed out from the previous one I took too, whilst I had the opportunity. And I've counted it, as you can see, marked up there approximately 9, maybe even 10 different trails. Could probably mark another one here on this area. So 9 different trails, several of them intersecting, as you can clearly see. This it makes no sense in terms of ordinary air traffic. So how long do these chemtrails last? Well, it's quite easy these days to do some time-lapse photography, which is what I did to try and measure this. And I've found here that they last at least 18 minutes. This is what I actually measured with this. So I've got a chemtrail coming in at 14:30 on the laptop's clock timer. Goes across the frame and it leaves at approximately 14:48. So I know that that trail has lasted at least 18 minutes. And some other film here from Las Vegas.
There is the Las Vegas Space Needle, stratosphere. Now what I want to bring out before this day, Monday, June 20th, is the fact that, look, as we go up, look at that. The military has been out here with all these chemtrails. Over on the outskirts of Las Vegas. It stopped laying it. And it continued to lay it. Wow, man. That's where it started. Why we don't see the trail going on all over the mountains? Well, that's the outskirts of Las Vegas. They're laying all these trails up over the sky to the other end of Las Vegas, and it stops. Now, this trail started like right there on the outskirts of Las Vegas. Now look. Wow, Benjamin. We have really tapped into the sources that be. We have discovered them seeding our area with fake clouds to keep it known from being known. They have, now I see why ABC TV 13 here is backed out. One right behind the other. 5, 6, 7, 8 these big-time jets all crisscrossing the skies. They're not regular airport jets. They're not headed towards the airport. They're not coming from the airport. They're not on any of the airport routes. But they all are going back and forth from Nellis. They're flying to and from Nellis Air Force Base. Wow, man, how many more is it up there? Now look at this. Military planes. As if they're watching us. They're not seeding. As if they are commanding the operation. Communicating with everybody, man. Somebody don't want the skies clear over Las Vegas. But they're going to have to do more than that, because I'm not giving up. Billions of tons dropped in the clear skies over major populations because the military knows that that Yahweh's angels are here and trying to get our attention. Billions of tons, and we wonder why the weather changes. Billions of tons, and a day, probably, a year. Billions of tons of chemicals, and we wondering why the atmosphere, ozone levels, and everything are all messed up, man. Now look at this. Look at that chemtrail there. Now, if you look at the direction it's headed across Las Vegas, you see that it didn't leave a chemtrail anywhere. This one waited real late until it got in the midst of a cloud to start releasing it. Had that been something that would just normally happen from flight fumes, the trail should have been traceable all the way over, coming across the sky. But like the rest of them, they all start in the location of the city limits of Las Vegas. This one started real late. Most of them would have started at least over there somewhere, but this one started clearly right in the midst of that cloud, as if they're trying to let us know
So we've seen the chemtrails. What about the planes? These things are coming out of planes. So what's going on? Well, we seem to see a variety of planes actually dumping this stuff out. Here's one. I think it looks like something like a C-130 maybe. In contrast to the ordinary commercial jet I recorded in flight on 16th February 2005, here is what appears to be a US Air Force cargo jet, possibly a C-130. This is the pattern we see when a plane is spraying chemtrails. Please note that the exhaust comes from the entire wingspan of the wings. There is a heavily concentrated plume directly from the tail in the centre as well, and there are no engines. Please compare this craft with the one in the previous series of pictures showing a regular contrail. Well, you can clearly see that that is the amount of trails coming out of that is just crazy. We can actually see, for example, 4 engines, 1, 2, 3, 4, obviously, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 streams, apparent streams. So this does not look like a regular contrail. And again, thick trails, greatly exaggerated from what you would expect. A few pictures like this now. Unmarked planes, obviously taken from quite close in this instance. No markings at all. Very unusual. This wispy effect, which I've seen from the ground several times. This wavy contrail. Another wide, thick trail. And another. And another seemingly left below this bank of trail here, which has started to spread out. More. And we even had a TV news report last year, which I tend to think is a kind of disclosure. They're admitting that this is real, but they're not telling you what it's about. But they are admitting that it is real. And this was on NBC News LA, 16th of May 2006.
Tonight, a community in the San Bernardino Mountains has a real mystery on its hands. The official explanation here is that jet contrails are causing strange lines in the sky, and that it's pollen making people sick on the ground. But others are convinced it is something else, and they ask, is the government experimenting with our weather?
There was a huge dust cloud.
Longtime Cedar Glen resident Gretchen Sherman says she has never seen anything like it.
How big was it? Oh, it covered the entire Cedar Glen area.
A cloud of dust, leaving a sticky yellow slime all over her car. It happened again last February, and calls began pouring into the local Alpenhorn newspaper.
And they had a tremendous upsurge of children that were not going to school at that time.
Pharmacist Ed Burrows says it is the most mysterious illness he's seen in 22 years on the mountain.
A lot of eye infection problems, upper respiratory problems, nosebleeds.
The nearby March Air Force Base say it didn't come from them. Others said it was a pollen cloud. The Department of Health found a yellowish tint on a tissue submitted for testing. But, quote, there was no sign of any biological form, such as cedar pollen, and the test was ruled inconclusive. And it wasn't long before things ballooned into a sky-high mystery. The story is not just here in Crestline and the alleged yellow cloud. People say the government is up there in airplanes spraying all kinds of chemicals to change or manipulate the weather, leaving what you see there, and they call that a chemtrail. So what I look at there and I think are contrails, you're telling me are chemtrails?
Yes, that a contrail would be dissipated by now.
It would?
Yes, it would.
Chemtrails. On the internet, they are cited as proof of the government creating clouds to combat global warming. In response, the Air Force says that, quote, there is no such thing as a chemtrail. The actual contrails are a safe and natural phenomenon. And that people are seeing more contrails simply because there are more jets forming large clouds, depending on weather conditions, as in this video of alleged chemtrails shot near San Francisco.
I think these are contrails.
Professor Gregory Benford of UC Irvine works with the Department of Energy on weather research.
That's very odd. They could be very large contrails.
He says the DOE doesn't know of any jets spraying chemicals to affect the weather. However, he says we will probably see it in the near future.
You've got to, in a sense, engineer all these so you get the right kind of clouds for the effects we want.
It is called geoengineering, fighting global warming by putting a chemical dust in the atmosphere and reflecting harmful radiation back into space.
You could use barium oxide, for example, which makes big fluffy clouds. You could use tiny little bits of aluminum, which is benign in the environment, and essentially manage the climate.
And what I found was unusual spiking since the early 1990s in barium, aluminum.
But Rosalind Peterson of California Skywatch says health department records show a sharp increase in both chemicals in the water supply of Northern California, dating from the time the huge contrails first appeared over her home in Mendocino County.
What's the significance of the barium and the aluminum?
I went and got all the tests, and all these things in the same test would be up way over state and federal standards. It had to be airborne, because how could it get to such diverse regions of our county? We have jets going in every direction. X's, east, west, north, south, circles. There is something going on in the air. I don't know exactly what, but I think there's some experimentation.
Is it legal?
I don't know, because we haven't had a public discussion.
But what is unknown today may be actual fact tomorrow, thanks to a bill soon to be voted on in the U.S. Senate, a Weather Modification Act, calling for research in, quote, attempting to change or control by artificial methods the natural development of atmospheric cloud forms.
Doesn't it seem to you that they're going to be doing it in the future for sure?
Yes. And if they are, I want to know about it.
In the meantime, a lot of people are wondering if they'll ever get clear skies and a clear answer.
The legislation is there, therefore somebody's thinking about this. How does this make sense?
I don't know, maybe they're practicing?
Over Cedar Glen, over Arrowhead.
I guess you have to try it out before you use it. I'm not sure.
Well, you be the judge. We'll keep you posted on anything further on this story, and there will be more, that's for sure. More information on the weather modification proposals, check on our website, NBC4.tv.
Now, there's another disturbing aspect to this, which is that you come across recounts of fibres falling from the air too. And this has been reported in a number of instances. Some people have reported that spiders' webs fall in the middle of winter. And Clifford Carnicom and William Thomas discussed them and the related issues.
Sometimes in the morning, at least in St. Louis, I would see what looked like massive spider webs all over bushes and shrubs, up in trees. And so I'm saying, well, you know, spiders have been working their heads off at night. But I'm also beginning to think, William, what are the possibilities that whatever this stuff is, fiber, is coming from the planes?
I think you're right on target with that. In my book that you mentioned, Chemtrails Confirmed, I describe an incident similar to what you're describing at the Denver airport, and a police officer's uniform was literally covered with this stuff. They told him the same story. Oh, those are overactive spiders. Maybe they need some Prozac or something. But it was December. There were no spiders. I called Bernard Eastland at his home in Texas and asked him about his invention called Haarp, working away up there in Alaska. And later, I called him back and I said, what about these fibers? Could these be some kind of polymer being sprayed into the air for this Haarp transmitter?